First of all, I'm super excited to be here. That's pretty much the best open mic set I've ever heard, and I've sat through some horrible ones.
Not at Tree, though. Not at Tree.
Never at Tree, obviously. And I was intending to kind of open up with a bit of a skit, or at least an explanation of Matt, the artist, but the bio was so thorough, I'm just going to skip that entire part. And say, you know, I've got this new chapbook out, and I'm super excited about it. I was recently, as in like last week, appointed the artistic director of Verse Fest, and that's been a really cool feather in my cap. I'm really happy to be doing that now that I've got slightly more time on my hands. And to start off, I'd like to read a chunk of my chapbook in the hopes that you will buy it. There's no right way to tell your mom that you're deploying to a war zone. We sat around the table in her little kitchen, dream catcher dangling from the central light. She wanted to know all my justifications. I formed them up like soldiers as she shook her head from side to side. In the kitchen's dim light, she could picture every son who ever went to war making the same impossible promises of safe return. As for me, I spent the next year watching the war in Afghanistan play out through drone feeds. When the rockets burst on the base, we cracked jokes from under our desks. Other times we hunted Taliban down the winding Panjwai roads. Drones, bombers, artillery. So many lives snuffed in those ditches I lost count. I remember a man injured from a drone strike. He kept reaching for his arm. I remember a woman collecting chunks of her son in a basket. After 8 months I couldn't dream without seeing the dead faces, pallid from blood loss, doll's eyes. So this is the sort of thing you can expect in my chapbook. So a little known fact, or maybe it is quite well known now, is that Armand was one of my poetry mentors. I took his class a few years ago, 2 years ago now. And the way it worked is every day you would come in with a poem, and you would read your poem aloud, and everyone would give you edits. And then you would take it, and at the end of the term, you would polish all of your poems and return them, and Armand would make the final assessment. So perhaps anticipating one day Armand and I would share the stage, I've kept all those comments. And I've tried to bring up some of those poems again. I'm not trying to embarrass him, I just think it's funny. The first poem I want to share here is called Kandahar Roommates, which I wrote for Armand. It's about my experiences in Afghanistan. I call my roommate the jerk-off police. Since whenever I start to rub one off, the dude tries to sabotage my release by rolling over with a snort and cough. The guy's got a painting of a moonlit sea on whose inky waters this vessel floats. He says it's a little ocean where he can flit away to sailor dreams of boats. And one night I checked to see if it's safe to spank it, 'cause I'm dreaming about Poon's sweet taste. My roommate has his arms around his blanket like he's clutching at his lover's waist. He strokes her arm and squeezes her tight, and I think at least he's getting laid tonight. Professor Rufo's comment, good for a chuckle. Of course, not everything I shared in the class was this light, and some of the stuff I ended up publishing, as you heard, and other things wound up in this chapbook. The chapbook, as you probably surmise, is a bunch of poems linked together by these narrative chunks, kind of like what I'm doing now. It tells my story, initially sailing with the Navy, various heartbreaks like burying my dad, eventually deploying. But finally, the book is about coming home, and the struggle to transition from soldier to artist, the struggle to turn something ugly into something valuable, something beautiful. So here's another one I wrote, which also came out of Armand's class. It's called Family Reunion. It's in the chapbook too. I work for this guy named Sailor who drove a ship before he came to Kandahar. He's got these bags under his eyes like he hasn't slept in 400 years. At first I thought Sailor was a Navy queer eager to touch my junk, but the guy can't take a shit without dreaming of new ways to kill towel heads. One dusty day, our drones spot two dudes who wear free-flowing robes like white pajamas. They start digging in a culvert. The ragheads don't hear the moan of the drone. Sailor slams a missile right between them. The explosion tears them open, sends them hurling in a spray of ground beef. Chest wound and leg torn off, can't reach each other. But they try anyway. Maybe they're brothers, or when you're dying, everyone is. There was a point when I was doing my master's last year where I realized that war poetry is the poetry that I'm into. You know, I get into it quite deeply from the kind of the nationalistic call to action of the Rupert Brooks to Wilfred Owen's eloquent pleas for peace. And I suppose when I think about it, it is rare to have a combination of voice and experience united within one brain. But more than this coincidence, I think veterans are uniquely poised to effect change because their experiences are so shocking, they're strong enough to rattle the status quo, or at least that's my hope, at least that's my naive hope. So this next poem is called Bomb Lake, also from Armand's class, and it's now published in Scintilla magazine. Bomb Lake. Two Taliban brothers huddle in a hand-scraped trench. They fire pot shots at a passing convoy of 8 trucked, squat-plated armadillos. The bullets ping off their metal brows to land on hillsides that bloom with white flowers and landmines. American soldiers soften the trench with 14 Hellfire missiles, then drop 67 500-pound bombs. The barrage carves a deep wound in the earth. The brothers are smashed from people to parts to chunks to bits to mist. Their particles cling to the dust and rain on the crater's shores. Merged with the earth and each other, the brothers become a disembodied voice that wails over Bomb Lake. For generations, the dirge echoes in the ears of children who gather by the water's edge to fly kites and dangle their stumps. So sure, the images like Bomb Lake, these are powerful images. They can be shocking, but I think for most people, soldiers aren't actually real. They're just these kind of bunches of words and images that we see on the news, and that's one of the reasons I started writing in the voices of veterans, people that I knew, people who were real to me, people whose wounds are uncommunicated and thus kind of carried in silence. And I thought to myself, if I can paint the picture perfectly, it's going to become real for other people too. I've seen prejudices against people in uniform, and we saw the shootings in October and the guy getting run over. Like, there are prejudices against people in uniform. At worst, they're the mindless cogs of government, these mechanisms of a great repressive system, or this paste of discipline and psychopathic tendencies merged into one. But I don't think that this is entirely true. I think things are a little bit more complicated than that. And I think that one of the reasons to see beyond these prejudices is that soldiers, very much like their victims, are capable of carrying wounds that are greater than themselves. Like the woman in the field who was picking up the pieces of her son. She's carrying a village. That's the whole village being injured when that happened. And that's the type of injury that this next poem, Wounded Village, is all about. You know, my mama was a Catholic, a true believer, man. Not the in-your-face, clubby with a crucifix type, but rather the so sorry to hear about your wife, Jesus has a plan type. The funny thing is, if she knew all the things I'd done, she'd think I was heading for hell. Nothing but flaming pitchforks and half-naked goatmen. I gotta admit, I dream about it. Hell, that is. Some fucking imps would be turning me on a spit all night long. But then I stopped caring and started looking forward to it. Just took the truth in the face like a vial of acid. The bottom line is, at least in hell I be getting punished and making amends for all that blood I spilt. Not like now. I got away scot-free except I push around this shame boulder wherever I go. You can't swing a dead cat without hitting one of those things. They're getting abandoned by the roadsides as veterans kill themselves in droves. Once we patrolled to the goat-fuck village of Nakadak to meet some locals we'd hired to build a road. But the Taliban showed up first and cut off their ears and noses. I guess the fuckers did it right in the middle of the marketplace so everyone could see. I can't imagine being that next guy in line, on my knees in the oven sun, waiting my turn for the gory shears. And in a way that was a good day for me because it made killing Taliban seem just. I still got all my face in the right spot, no Picasso here, but I can relate to those mutilated bastards. feeling like a monster and growing old and lonely 'cause no one, not even you, can stand your ugliness? I'd say if everyone in our village was part of one big-ass person, where one guy was the hands and another the brain, then my job would be the jagged and protruding ridge of bone marking the spot where the ear was hacked off. So this isn't the first war poetry reading that I've done now. I've done a couple, and I generally find that around this point, people start getting kind of exhausted, and they start rocking back and forth, and they start sobbing a little bit, and that's when I try to lighten it up. And I have a absolutely notorious poem which I should stop reading in public. This is going to be my last time. But when the other day I was at my first artistic director meeting for Verse Fest, and one of the people on the board was like, he tried to chirp me, and he was like, "Hey, remember that poem?" And he tried to embarrass me right in front of everybody, and that's not going to fly. So this one's called "Twice the Love." I dedicate it to David. Darling, do you remember that time I stripped you like an avocado, your rind dropping to the floor? I chained your nipples with kisses, swirling my tongue till they stiffened. Your moan meant find a condom now, but the drawer was ransacked. No condoms, just an oily lube stain in the shape of the Virgin Mary. A shaft of You guys are cracking me up. A shaft of moonlight illumined last week's discarded sheath, a snakeskin slathered on the side of the radiator. Under the guise of lighting a candle, I scraped the rubber free and pulled apart its yeasty sides. Sorry, I pulled apart its sticky sides. The yeasty stench thickened when I plunged inside and felt last week's swimmer squirming when I broke through the crust. Professor Rufo's comment: yuck, good use of imagery. As most people have probably figured out, humor is obviously one of my coping strategies. And when people meet me for the first time, I think it's one of the first walls that they have to climb in order to really know me. It's this obstacle that's in the way. And usually when I tell jokes, even when they're absolutely revolting jokes, I don't regret it. And when I tell jokes and no one laughs, I don't regret it. But the jokes in this next poem, I regret these ones. That's why I keep coming back to it. You know that feeling you have when you want to help someone more than anything, but you can't? This next poem's called Gallows Humor. And it's about a pregnant woman that I watched die through a drone's camera. She wanders the marketplace, hands drifting to her swollen belly. The roadside bomb functions, wrenches her legs off below the knees. Her blood muddies the sand, hangs in the air like a shroud. We sent a helicopter for her, but the men of the village didn't let the medical team get close. I made jokes to ease our impotence. She's a gusher, all right. Check out her O-face, as she screamed her life away. These are my sorrows, friends. This is in a way my self-flagellation here, and my pride and my shame are all mixed up together. But at least I have outlets. I have writing and the piano and poetry and kittens and yoga and books. And I think about all my peers, the veterans who have no outlets at all, or maybe it's just the gym. All this poison in their brains and no way to get rid of it except to put a bullet in there. A veteran suicide, it's a thing. We lost more soldiers to suicide during the conflict in Afghanistan than we did to enemy action. Personally, I've been involved in the suicides of 5 different soldiers, one of whom I knew well, and I dedicate this next poem to her. It's called New Recruit. Sure, they say coming home is no picnic, but coming home ugly is worse. And I don't even mean these scars or this stump. I mean ugly like a scowl etched in your face, a big neon sign over your head flashing killer. My wife could see it too, though maybe the word wife doesn't fit her. I was only halfway through my tour when she sent this email. She was lonely and gonna take a boyfriend on the side till I got back. I'd be out on patrol, one of our tin-bottom Humvees humming next to me, and I'd start thinking about my wife choking on some other guy's dick, and my fingers would twitch on my C7. Fuck it, and fuck her, I'd say that family shit is making me soft. A fucking Haji fired an AK at our Humvee that day and pinned us down. I crept up behind the prick and opened up an entire clip. The bullet holes oozed. And you know the funny thing? I was jealous of that dead kid. Jealous of that piece he had lying there, a punctured canteen. That night back in the fob, I crept to the shitter and held my C7 to my chin. I kept picturing my brain splattered all over the insides of the porta-potty, gray matter splashing down to that murky blue. But then I thought of the poor SOB who'd have to hose me out of there, so I just wept and clutched my wedding ring. But for a second there in that crapper, I could picture myself on parade with a shitload of soldiers. It was so vivid, we were so fucking proud. Our drill was perfect, and our boots struck the asphalt in sync with a loud ass crack. But as I looked around, I saw that each soldier was fucked up. Some faces were bloated and blue. Some guys were missing faces. Chest wounds bled through uniforms, head twisted backwards. A few wore scarves of festering scars. I was sitting on that shitter with my rifle in my mouth, and the ghoul hands of the suicide battalion reached for me. They whispered the battalion was ever growing, ever recruiting. They said they needed me, that I could find a new home with them. They pleaded for me not to keep them waiting. So that poem starts with the narrator pining about being a monster, and I think when I first came home from Afghanistan, that was my biggest worry. I was worried that I was a monster and everyone knew it. But I've started to come to peace with that. It was very hard to learn compassion for my enemies. It was even harder to learn compassion for myself. So I wrote this next piece, the final piece of my little set here, trying to answer the questions of, can a monster love? Can a monster know peace? It's a love poem between two krakens. It's called The Kraken's Pledge, and it was recently published in an Inwards chapbook called Mythic Beasts. You should buy that one too. I dedicate this one to Kate. The Kraken's Pledge. I have wandered with you for 3 migrations of the cod from one side of the great ocean to the other. Many times we surfaced to stare at the flickering lights above the water at night, impossibly far out of reach. We have seen all the marvels of the ocean, long-tusked whales, jousting fishing vessels, volcanoes erupting, hurling globes of magma, a vicious twister that nearly hauled us from the waters, its great blank eye staring down at us. In the past 10 seasons, I've never seen you like this, the glands alongside your throat swollen with eggs. And though we are the last 2 of our kind, I've always tried to show that even if the seas teem with us, thousands, enough to drink the world dry, I would choose you. You carry the future of our species, but you don't carry it alone, which is why I make this pledge. I pledge I will scrape barnacles from you and entwine tentacles while we curl in the coral until old age pits our skin like volcanic rock. I will scour the ocean floor to make you a nest of sunken ships. I will stretch my limbs wide and stay immobile for days until swarms of fish gather in the shadows so you can feast. And if men ever come for you in their ships, I will rise from the waters flailing, a cataclysm in the midst of their armadas. I will wrap my tentacles around the hulls of the closest ships, shaking and squeezing until the upper decks are swept of sailors and the men below decks are pulverized on the bulkheads. I will crush rudders and riggings on fast ships and fling sharks onto the decks of far ones. I'll pluck sailors from the sea and gnash them with my scaly beak. And when sated, I'll descend so fast survivors will be hauled into my whirlpool wake, flushed to the ocean floor, where their corpses will float in the water, jellyfish. I should also mention, that one was also published in Jenna Jarvis's zine, Fishy Friends. I'm totally sorry I missed it.
No, it's all right. You said it now. Yeah.
That's it, friends. Thank you very much. I really appreciate it.